Close your eyes, and let your mind drift back through the mists of time, back over 4,000 years, to a land where the golden sun rises over endless stretches of sand, where a mighty river flows like a ribbon of life through an ancient desert. Tonight, we journey together to the cradle of one of humanity's most enduring civilizations. Ancient Egypt, a realm of pharaohs and pyramids, of gods and goddesses who walked among mortals, of wisdom carved in stone that has withstood the test of millennia. As you settle into comfort, feel the warm desert breeze, imagine the gentle lapping of the Nile against papyrus reeds. Picture yourself floating peacefully down this sacred river, past temples that gleam white in the moonlight, past monuments that touch the stars. Let the rhythm of your breathing match the eternal flow of the Nile, in and out, steady and calm, as we begin our peaceful journey through the Egyptian Empire. Where time moves as slowly as the great river itself, and where every story whispers of human dreams that have echoed through the ages. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus once wrote that Egypt was the gift of the Nile, and as we drift along this life-giving river, we can understand why he spoke these words with such reverence. Imagine, if you will, floating gently on a traditional papyrus boat, the kind that has carried people along these waters for thousands of years. Feel the smooth wooden oar in your hands as you guide your vessel through waters that sparkle like scattered diamonds under the ancient sun. The Nile is not just a river, it is the heartbeat of Egypt, stretching over 4,000 miles from its sources in the heart of Africa, flowing steadily northward to the Mediterranean Sea. For the ancient Egyptians, this great river was not merely water, it was life itself. It was the tears of the goddess Isis. It was the pathway to the afterlife. Every year, with the reliability of the seasons themselves, the Nile would rise. Beginning in July, the river would swell with the summer rains from the Ethiopian highlands, slowly, peacefully, predictably. The ancient Egyptians called this season, Ake, the time of inundation, when the river would overflow its banks and spread across the land like a gentle blessing. Picture these annual floods, not as violent torrents, but as nature's most generous gift. The water would rise slowly, covering the fields with a thin layer of rich, dark, fertile silt. This magical mud, carried from the mountains of Africa, transformed the harsh desert into the most productive farmland in the ancient world. The Egyptians developed a calendar around this sacred rhythm. They divided their year into 3 seasons of 4 months each. Ake, the flood season, followed by Parade, the growing season, when farmers would plant their crops in the soft, nourished earth, and finally Shimu, the harvest season, when golden wheat and barley would wave in the desert breeze like fields of liquid gold. This predictable cycle brought more than just food, it brought peace of mind. While other ancient peoples lived in fear of famine and uncertainty, the Egyptians could count on their river. They could plan, they could dream, they could build monuments that would last forever, because they knew that next year, and the year after that, the Nile would rise again. The river shaped not just their agriculture, but their entire worldview. They believed that after death, the soul would travel along a celestial Nile through the underworld. The river became their highway to eternity. And just as it nourished their bodies in life, they trusted it would carry them safely to the afterlife. Along the riverbanks, communities flourished. Children played in the shallow waters while their mothers washed clothes on the smooth stones. Fishermen cast their nets in the early morning mist, just as their ancestors had done for countless generations. Merchants loaded their boats with grain, pottery, and precious goods, ready to sail to distant lands. The papyrus that grew in the marshy areas became the paper of the ancient world. From these tall, graceful reeds, scribes would create the scrolls that preserved Egyptian wisdom for thousands of years. Even the boats were made from papyrus bundles, bound together with such skill that they could carry heavy cargo across the Mediterranean. As night falls over our imaginary journey, the Nile becomes a mirror for the stars. The ancient Egyptians saw the river of stars above as the heavenly reflection of their earthly Nile, and believed that their beloved river connected earth to heaven, water to sky, life to eternity. Feel yourself floating peacefully on these sacred waters, surrounded by the gentle sounds of night birds and the whisper of wind through papyrus reeds. Let the eternal rhythm of the Nile carry away your worries, just as it has carried away the concerns of countless generations, and rest in the knowledge that some things in this world are as constant and reliable as the flow of this ancient river. As we continue our peaceful journey through time, we come to understand how the predictable gift of the Nile allowed something extraordinary to emerge from the desert sands, the world's first great unified kingdom, ruled by god-kings called Pharaohs. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of the Nile around 3100 BCE, over 5,000 years ago. The air is warm and still, and you are witnessing one of history's most significant moments. A king named Narmer, also known as Menes, is about to unite the separate kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt into one great empire. Picture King Narmer, tall and regal, wearing the distinctive double crown that would become the symbol of pharaonic power. The white crown of Upper Egypt nested inside the red crown of Lower Egypt. This moment of unification would begin a tradition of kingship that would endure for over 3,000 years, longer than any other civilization in human history. The word pharaoh means great house, and these rulers were believed to be living gods, divine beings who served as intermediaries between the mortal world and the eternal realm of the gods. When you were in the presence of a pharaoh, you were literally in the presence of divinity made flesh. Each morning, in temples throughout Egypt, priests would perform the daily ritual of awakening the pharaoh's divine essence. They would wash statues of the king with sacred water from the Nile, dress them in fine linen, and offer them food and incense, just as they would care for the statues of the gods themselves. The pharaohs ruled from magnificent palaces that seemed to float like mirages in the desert heat. These great buildings were constructed with the finest materials from across the known world. Cedar wood from Lebanon, gold from Nubia, precious stones from the eastern desert. Every detail proclaimed the pharaoh's divine nature and unlimited power. One of the most fascinating aspects of pharaonic rule was the concept of Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian principle of truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining Ma'at throughout the kingdom, ensuring that the Nile flooded properly, that justice was served, that the gods were pleased, and that chaos was kept at bay. Picture the daily life of a pharaoh. Rising before dawn in chambers perfumed with frankincense and myrrh. Being dressed by attendants in the finest linen robes, softer than silk. Wearing jewelry crafted from gold that gleamed like captured sunlight. Every movement was ritual, every gesture carried sacred meaning. The pharaoh would hold court in great halls where the ceiling was painted to look like the star-filled sky, where columns rose like stylized palm trees, and where the air shimmered with the smoke of sacred incense. Here, officials from across the empire would come to receive wisdom and judgment, knowing they were in the presence of a living God. But perhaps most remarkably, many pharaohs were women. Queens like Hatshepsut, who ruled for over 20 years during the height of Egypt's power, and Nefertiti, whose name means, the beautiful one has come. These female pharaohs wore the same divine regalia as their male counterparts, including the false beard that symbolized wisdom and divine authority. The pharaohs saw themselves as shepherds of their people, responsible for their well-being both in this life and the next. They built not just palaces and monuments, but also irrigation systems, storage facilities for grain, and temples where common people could come to pray and seek blessings. As the centuries passed, the institution of pharaonic rule became woven into the very fabric of Egyptian life. Children grew up knowing that their pharaoh was watching over them, that divine protection surrounded their land, and that as long as the pharaoh maintained Ma'at, the Nile would continue to flood, the sun would continue to rise, and Egypt would remain the most blessed land on earth. The pharaohs developed elaborate ceremonies to mark the important moments of their reign. The coronation involved rituals that could last for days, with processions along the Nile, offerings at every major temple, and celebrations in every city and village. The people would line the riverbanks, throwing flower petals into the water, and calling out blessings for their divine ruler. Even in death, the pharaohs continued to serve their people. They were mummified and entombed with everything they would need to continue their divine duties in the afterlife, and their spirits were believed to intercede with the gods on behalf of Egypt for all eternity. As you drift peacefully along the Nile in your imagination, picture the great palaces and temples rising from the banks, their golden surfaces reflecting in the water like fallen stars. Feel the presence of these ancient god-kings, whose wisdom and power created one of humanity's most enduring civilizations, and let their eternal peace settle over you like a gentle blessing. As we float further along our peaceful journey through ancient Egypt, the monuments of the pharaohs rise before us like dreams made stone. These are not merely buildings, they are prayers carved in granite, hopes sculpted in sandstone, and promises of eternity written in hieroglyphs across temple walls. Picture yourself approaching the plateau of Giza just as the morning sun crests the horizon. The Great Pyramid of Khufu emerges from the golden mist, a perfect geometric mountain rising 481 feet toward heaven. For over 3,800 years, this was the tallest building ever created by human hands, a testament to the pharaoh's divine power and the skill of Egyptian architects. The pyramid was not built by slaves as Hollywood might have you believe, but by skilled workers who were well-fed and honored for their service. Archaeological evidence shows us that these builders received daily rations of bread, beer, onions, and garlic. They lived in purpose-built villages near the construction site, with bakeries, breweries, and even medical facilities. Imagine the dedication of these craftsmen, generation after generation, fathers teaching sons the sacred geometry needed to align these monuments with the stars. Each block of limestone, some weighing as much as 15 tons, was quarried, transported, and placed with precision that astounds engineers even today. The pyramid was designed as a resurrection machine, a divine instrument to transform the pharaoh's mortal body into an eternal spiritual form. Inside its chambers, the king would begin his journey to become one with Ra, the sun god, sailing across the sky by day and through the underworld by night. But the pyramids were just the beginning of Egypt's architectural wonders. Let your mind wander south, to the magnificent temple complex of Karnak, where pharaohs for over 2,000 years added their own contributions to what would become the largest religious building ever constructed. Picture walking through the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, where 134 massive columns rise like a forest of stone, each one carved with intricate hieroglyphs and painted in colors that still glow after millennia. The columns were designed to represent papyrus plants, creating the illusion that you were walking through the primordial marsh where creation itself began. The ancient Egyptians believed that their temples were literally the houses of the gods. Each morning, the high priest would enter the innermost sanctuary, break the clay seal on the shrine, and symbolically awaken the god for a new day. He would wash the sacred statue, dress it in clean linen, offer it food and drink, and burn incense to please the divine senses. These rituals were performed with the same careful attention to detail that went into building the temples themselves. Every gesture had meaning, every word had power, and every offering was a link between the human and divine worlds. The temples were places where heaven and earth touched, where mortals could glimpse eternity. Consider the Temple of Abu Simbel, carved directly into the living rock by Ramesses II. For colossal statues of the pharaoh, each 65 feet tall, guard the entrance like eternal sentinels. Twice a year, on the pharaoh's birthday and coronation day, the rising sun penetrates deep into the temple, illuminating statues of Ramesses seated with the gods in the innermost sanctuary. This was not mere architectural showmanship, but profound religious engineering. The temples were designed to capture and focus divine energy, to create spaces where the cosmic order could be renewed and maintained. Every angle, every measurement, every carved symbol worked together to maintain Ma'at, the divine harmony that kept the universe in balance. The builders of these monuments understood something that we are only beginning to rediscover, that human beings need beauty, need grandeur, need to feel connected to something greater than themselves. The temples and tombs of ancient Egypt were designed to inspire awe, to remind people of their place in the cosmic order, and to provide comfort in the face of mortality. Picture the Valley of the Kings, where the pharaohs of the New Kingdom chose to be buried. This hidden valley, protected by the pyramid-shaped peak of Al-Qurn, became a necropolis unlike anywhere else on earth. 63 tombs, carved deep into the limestone cliffs, decorated with the most beautiful art ever created. The tomb walls told the story of the pharaoh's journey through the afterlife, illustrated with scenes from the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, and other sacred texts. These were not merely decorations, but magical spells, protective formulas, and detailed maps of the spiritual realm, designed to ensure the pharaoh's safe passage to eternity. The artists who painted these tombs worked by the light of oil lamps, their shadows dancing across the walls as they created images of gods and goddesses, of celestial boats sailing across star-filled skies, of the pharaoh being welcomed into the company of the divine. Each brushstroke was an act of devotion, each color had sacred meaning, each scene was a prayer painted in pigment. Even the workers' villages near these great monuments were carefully planned communities, with straight streets, proper drainage, and houses built around central courtyards where families could gather in the evening coolness. These builders understood that creating monuments for eternity required not just skill and devotion, but communities of people who cared for one another. As you rest peacefully in your imagination, surrounded by these eternal monuments, feel the same sense of awe and wonder that has moved visitors for thousands of years. These stones have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of countless generations, yet they remain, patient and eternal, reminders that human beings can create beauty that transcends time itself. Let the presence of these ancient monuments settle over you like a blessing, knowing that the same stars that guided the pyramid builders still shine above us, and that the same human dreams of beauty, meaning, and eternity that inspired the pharaohs continue to inspire us today. Now let us step away from the monuments of kings and gods, and drift peacefully into the everyday world of ancient Egypt, where ordinary people lived extraordinary lives along the banks of the sacred Nile. Here, in villages of mud brick houses, in workshops filled with craftsmen, in markets bustling with trade, we find the true heart of Egyptian civilization. Picture yourself awakening in an ancient Egyptian home just as the first light of dawn touches the eastern horizon. The house is built of mud bricks mixed with chopped straw, materials that keep the interior cool during the heat of the day and warm during the cooler nights. The walls are painted white to reflect the sun, and small windows are positioned to catch the prevailing breeze from the river. Your bed is a simple wooden frame strung with rope, topped with linen sheets that are surprisingly soft and clean. The Egyptians were famous throughout the ancient world for their textiles, and even common people took pride in wearing clean, well-made clothing. Linen was not just fabric to them, but a symbol of purity, the cloth of the gods. As you rise with the sun, you join the rhythm that has governed Egyptian life for millennia. The day begins with the morning meal, perhaps some bread baked from emmer wheat, dates sweet as honey, and beer brewed from barley. Beer was not just refreshment but nutrition, safer to drink than water and rich in vitamins. Even children drank a light beer with their breakfast. Picture walking through your neighborhood as the day begins. Children playing games that archaeologists still recognize today, Senet, a board game that symbolized the journey through the afterlife, knucklebones, and wrestling matches in the dusty streets. Their laughter echoes the same joy that has filled Egyptian homes for thousands of years. The women of the household begin their daily tasks, spinning flax into thread on spindles that have remained unchanged for centuries, weaving on looms that produce linen so fine it was treasured by royalty throughout the ancient world, grinding grain with stone querns, the steady rhythm creating a percussion that accompanies the songs they sing while they work. In workshops throughout the village, craftsmen pursue skills passed down from father to son, generation after generation. The potter shapes clay vessels on wheels that spin with hypnotic regularity, creating everything from simple storage jars to delicate cosmetic containers. His hands move with the confidence of inherited knowledge, every curve and line reflecting techniques perfected over millennia. The carpenter works with tools that would be familiar to any modern woodworker: saws, chisels, mallets, and measuring rods. He crafts furniture, boats, and coffins with equal skill, understanding that his work serves both the living and the dead. Each joint is fitted with precision, each surface smoothed to perfection. Visit the metalworker's shop, where bronze glows like liquid fire in the furnace. Gold is hammered into jewelry so fine it seems to capture sunlight itself. Silver is crafted into vessels for the temple. The rhythmic pounding of hammers on metal creates a music all its own, a song of transformation, turning raw materials into objects of beauty and purpose. The scribes hold perhaps the most honored position in Egyptian society. Apart from the priesthood and nobility, to be literate in ancient Egypt was to possess magic itself, the power to make thoughts permanent, to communicate across vast distances, to preserve wisdom for future generations. They write on papyrus with reed pens and ink made from soot and gum, their hieroglyphic script flowing like art across the page. As the morning progresses, the market comes alive with activity. Farmers bring their produce from the fields. Fresh vegetables grown in the rich Nile mud, onions, leeks, cucumbers, and melons. Fishermen display their catch from the river, perch and catfish still glistening with water. Hunters offer wild fowl from the marshes, ducks and geese that will grace the tables of the wealthy. The Egyptians developed one of the world's most sophisticated systems of trade, not based on money as we know it, but on barter and exchange. A pair of sandals might be worth 3 loaves of bread, a linen tunic equivalent to a jar of beer and some dates. Everyone knows the standard rates, and negotiations are conducted with good humor and social ritual. Picture the afternoon heat sending people to seek shade in their courtyards, where they might nap during the hottest hours, or engage in quiet conversations. Women often gathered to share news and gossip while their children played nearby. Men might play board games or discuss the day's work. The pace of life adjusted naturally to the rhythm of the sun and seasons. The Egyptians were remarkably clean people, bathing regularly in the Nile or in water drawn from wells. They used soap made from animal fat and ash, perfumed themselves with oils scented with frankincense and myrrh. Both men and women wore eye makeup, not just for beauty but for protection against the harsh desert sun and to prevent eye infections. Evening brings relief from the heat, and with it, some of life's greatest pleasures. Families gather for the main meal of the day, sitting on mats on the floor around low tables, sharing bread, vegetables stewed with herbs, roasted fish or fowl, and sweet cakes made with honey. The conversation flows as freely as the beer, mixing news of the day with stories passed down through generations. As darkness falls, oil lamps are lit, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The flames flicker like tiny stars, creating an intimate atmosphere perfect for storytelling. Music fills the air, harps and flutes, drums and sistrums, creating melodies that seem to float on the night breeze. Children gather around their elders to hear tales of the gods, stories of clever animals, adventures of brave heroes. These stories are more than entertainment, they are education, moral instruction, and cultural preservation all woven together. Each tale carries the wisdom of ages, presented in forms that capture young imaginations. Before sleep, families often step outside to look up at the star-filled sky. The same constellations that guide the Pharaoh's journey to the afterlife also provide comfort and wonder to common people. The Milky Way, which the Egyptians called the beaten path of stars, stretches across the heavens like a pathway to eternity. As you drift toward sleep in this ancient Egyptian home, surrounded by the gentle sounds of a civilization at peace with itself, feel the deep contentment that comes from living in harmony with natural rhythms, where each day follows the patterns set by countless generations, where tradition provides security, and where the sacred and mundane blend seamlessly together. Let yourself be carried to rest by the same gentle rhythms that have soothed Egyptian families for thousands of years, the distant sound of the Nile flowing toward the sea, the whisper of desert wind through palm fronds, and the eternal promise that tomorrow will bring another day of life along the blessed river. As our peaceful journey through ancient Egypt draws toward its close, we come to perhaps the most profound and beautiful aspect of this remarkable civilization, their understanding of death not as an ending, but as a transformation. A journey into eternity that filled them not with fear, but with hope and careful preparation. Picture yourself in the workshop of an Egyptian embalmer, but this is not a place of sorrow. Rather, it is a sacred space where skilled artisans practice the most holy of all crafts, the preservation of the human body for its eternal journey. The air is filled with the sweet scents of natron salt, cedar oil, and precious resins from distant lands. The Egyptians believed that the soul consisted of multiple parts. The Ka, the life force that animated the body. The Ba, the personality and individual essence that made each person unique. And the Ak, the transformed spiritual being that the deceased would become in the afterlife. Death was simply the process of separating these elements so they could be reunited in the eternal realm. Imagine witnessing the careful, reverent process of mummification. First, the body is washed with wine and spices. A purification ritual that prepares it for its sacred transformation. Then, in a process that takes 70 days, the body is gradually transformed into a form that will last forever, wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen strips, each one inscribed with protective spells. The most beautiful mummies were adorned with jewelry and amulets, each one carefully positioned according to ancient formulas. The golden death mask, like the famous mask of Tutankhamun, was not merely decoration but a magical device to help the deceased navigate the afterlife. The face, crafted to perfection, would allow the soul to recognize and return to its eternal body. But mummification was not just for pharaohs and nobles. Ordinary Egyptians also prepared for eternity, though with simpler methods suited to their means. Even the poorest families would scrape together resources to ensure their loved ones had some preparation for the journey ahead, because the afterlife, they believed, was the great democracy where all souls could find eternal happiness. Picture the funeral procession, not as a march of despair, but as a celebration of transformation. The mummy, placed in its beautiful coffin, is carried on a boat-shaped sledge, symbolizing the journey across the celestial Nile. Professional mourners wail and tear their hair, their grief expressing the natural human sorrow at separation, while at the same time helping to guide the deceased toward their new existence. The procession makes its way to the tomb, which has been prepared with everything the deceased will need in the afterlife. Food and drink for nourishment, clothing and jewelry for comfort and status, tools for work, games for entertainment. Even small figurines called shabdi, magical servants who will perform any labor required of the deceased in the eternal realm. The walls of the tomb are decorated with scenes of daily life, but these are not merely memories. They are magical recreations that will become real in the afterlife. The deceased will tend gardens that bloom eternally, will enjoy feasts that never end, will reunite with beloved family members and friends. The paintings serve as both decoration and magical spells, ensuring that the afterlife will be filled with joy. At the heart of Egyptian belief about death was the concept of the weighing of the heart. Picture the deceased standing before Osiris, god of the underworld, in the Hall of Two Truths. The heart, which the Egyptians believed was the seat of intelligence and emotion, is placed on a scale. Balanced against a feather, the symbol of Ma'at, divine truth and justice. If the heart is lighter than the feather, if the deceased has lived a good life according to Ma'at, they are welcomed into the eternal paradise known as the Field of Reeds, a place like Egypt itself but perfect, where the Nile never fails to flood, where crops grow without effort, where the sun shines eternally, and where families are reunited forever. This is not a distant, abstract heaven, but a perfected version of the life they knew and loved. The deceased will live in houses like those they knew in life, but more beautiful. They will eat familiar foods, but more delicious. They will work in the fields, but the labor will be joyful and the harvest always abundant. The Egyptian view of death was profoundly optimistic. They saw life and death as part of an eternal cycle, like the daily journey of the sun god Ra, who dies each evening in the west and is reborn each morning in the east. Death was simply sunset, to be followed inevitably by the sunrise of eternal life. This belief transformed how they lived. Knowing that they would be judged by how well they had followed Ma'at. Egyptians strived to live lives of truth, justice, and compassion. They cared for their families, were honest in their dealings, helped those in need, and maintained the cosmic order through their daily actions. Picture an Egyptian family visiting the tomb of their ancestors, bringing flowers and food, sharing news of births and marriages, asking for guidance and blessings. The dead were not gone, but remained active members of the family, able to intercede with the gods and offer protection to their loved ones. Death did not break the bonds of love, but transformed them into something eternal. As you rest peacefully, contemplating this ancient wisdom, consider how the Egyptians found comfort in their deep understanding of continuity. The Nile would continue to flow, the sun would continue to rise and set, families would continue to love and care for one another, both in this world and the next. Their monuments still stand because they built for eternity, but more importantly, their wisdom about the eternal nature of love and family still speaks to us across the millennia. Let yourself drift toward peaceful sleep. Surrounded by the same eternal rhythms that comforted the ancient Egyptians. The flow of the sacred river, the cycle of the seasons, the promise that love transcends even death, and the deep peace that comes from understanding our place in the great cosmic order that connects all things, past, present, and future, in one eternal, beautiful, ever-flowing stream of existence. Feel yourself floating gently on the eternal Nile, past monuments that gleam in starlight, past gardens where the blessed dwell in eternal joy, toward a rest as peaceful and lasting as the ancient stones themselves. Sleep now, and dream of eternity.